I'm the CEO of Challenge Seattle and co-chair of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor. My co-chair, my partner in crime, my soulmate is here with us, Greg D'Avanon from the British Columbia Business Council. Always a delight to be with Greg and to work together on doing some good things for our region. This is our sixth virtual forum. This one is hosted by our Best and Diverse Talent Subcommittee. The co-chairs, whom you will hear from today, include Dr. Tom Romer, who's the Vice President Academic for British Columbia Institute of Technology, and Dr. Amy Morrison, who's President of the Lake Washington Institute of Technology. For those of you who are not familiar with the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, it's one of a relatively few number of mega regions in the world. There are 11 in North America and just 20-some worldwide. Unlike many others, we come together with a shared set of values, a shared culture, as well as a shared opportunity for economic prosperity. Almost all the others are founded on that last principle alone. The Cascadia Innovation Corridor is also very unique compared to any of the others because we are the first one to say we not only want to prosper economically, but we want to look at some of the most significant challenges that we're facing in the corridor, work together collectively to find solutions, share our solutions around the globe so that we can, address things like healthcare and other issues. This is a indication today of what we have at this webinar of those shared values, those shared really opportunities to us to lead the world and looking at some solutions to pressing issues. We want to make sure that we're looking at facing up to some of the challenges that we have in the corridor, whether it's healthcare as evidenced by COVID, food security, again, COVID brought that home, congestion and climate change. So as the world is really trying to grapple with changing environment and sustainability, we really share a common ethos here in the Pacific Northwest, where we collectively, our populations really do want to share sustainability and conservation. And we're really quite fortunate at this time to have three leaders absolutely committed to climate and to sustainability in the Premier and the governors of Washington and Oregon. We issued a report in the fall called Cascadia 2050, a vision for the future of the corridor. And in it, Boston Consulting Group, our consultant, helped us understand that we're looking at a projected growth in population of over 4 million people. And in order to accommodate that, we really believed we fundamentally had to ask ourselves, how can we do that in a sustainable way? Hence, we said our goal is to be the first sustainable mega region in the world, share our success and learnings with everybody elsewhere, and hopefully motivate them to join us in making sure that all mega regions in the world are sustainable. So we are fortunate here to have business and government post-secondary institutions that really want to build sustainable communities. And not only do we then need to, what are the policies and what are the approaches to making sure that the types of eco-cities that our first speakers will talk about today can actually flourish, but we also need to address the need for talent and knowledge to help drive the solutions and embed them in our daily lives. So the second panel this morning will explore how partnerships, post-secondary institutions, and approaches like micro-credentialing can actually support that overall effort for us to have eco-cities throughout the region. So again, thank you all for joining us. I look forward to hearing from our panelists today. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Amy Morrison, one of our co-chairs, to share some insights as to what the committee's work is comprised of currently. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Governor. Good to see you this morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Morrison. I'm the president of Lake Washington Institute of Technology in Kirkland, Washington State. And together with my co-chair, Dr. Tom Romer from the British Columbia Institute of Technology. We've co-chaired the Best and Diverse Talent Group within the Cascadia Innovation Corridor now for the past few years. And we're just so pleased to be here today on behalf of the entire working group. Before I introduce my co-chair, Dr. Romer, I'd just like to give a very brief overview of what our committee has been focused on. But first, I'd just like to say, on behalf of many Washingtonians, the daily conversation is, when will the border open? We're just so looking forward to seeing our friends in Canada, hopefully sooner rather than later. So with that said, our Best and Diverse Talent Group is really focused on 3 areas, very briefly: strategic workforce development, interdisciplinary education, and mobility. Preparing for the future needs of industry and society is really our core mandate. And as we all know, environmental sustainability is a critical component to the current and future needs of many of our industries, and that is why we are here today. I'd like to thank the leadership for their tireless efforts with the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, and turn it over to my co-chair, who's really done the heavy lifting for today's webinar, Dr. Tom Romer. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amy. Thanks for your kind words, and welcome everybody on behalf of BCIT as well. We here at BCIT were very excited to co-host this webinar simply because we strongly believe in both the concept of the Cascadia Corridor and being less of a strain on the ecosystem of our small planet. And at BCIT, we believe that we need to be a little bit more prudent and manage our urban expansion. Our cities can't grow forever, and we cannot add an unlimited number of cars to our road systems. We need to find a balance between economy and ecology, and we need to listen to expert voices on how this can be accomplished. And one of these expert voices we have here today, our own Cora Halsworth, is one of the leaders at BCIT's Ecocities Center. To give you a little bit of a background on the center, and Cora will do that much more, but in 2019, BCIT hosted the International Ecocities Conference in Vancouver. And that attracted about 1,500 delegates from around the world. And as an ongoing commitment, if you wish, to a commitment to the cause itself, we founded the center, and it has since been the hub of much activity, all the way up to TED Talks and a whole bunch of activities. And that's largely due to the engagement of people like Cora. So Cora herself, she actually has over 20 years experience in advancing community and organizational sustainability. And she's now a manager of our municipal programs for the BCIT Center for Ecocities. And she's also the principal, by the way, of her own consulting practice. So she definitely has her work cut out for herself. Cora is currently leading the pilot testing of novel tools and approaches to support community action to advance sustainable consumption practices. And without much further ado, because you don't want to listen to me, you want to listen to her, I give you Cora Halsworth.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you to the rest of the team. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. And can you see that, Tom?
Yes, there it is.
Great. Thank you. So again, thank you. Really honored to be here with all of you today. So again, I'm Cora Halsworth, Manager of Municipal Programs at the British Columbia Institute for Technology Center for Ecocities. I'm coming to you from the land of the Coast Salish peoples, and more specifically, the land of the Wasanic, also known as Greater Victoria. Before I start, I wanted to give some background on our work at the Center for Ecocities. The aim of the center is to support the evolution of ecocities worldwide. This includes supporting research, providing tools, metrics, expert planning and policy advice, training and other services that cities and their partners need to become genuine ecocities. We're also developing educational programs like the Climate Changemakers Youth Training, and hopefully soon new micro-credentials on consumption-based sustainability metrics. At the center, key metrics that we use to help inform this transition to socially just cities that are in balance with nature are the ecological footprint and consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions. Recently, we've been working with 10 BC pilot communities to help them evaluate and work with these metrics, and we're also creating an EcoCity peer network of cities to foster knowledge exchange. We have webinars posted on our website if you'd like to learn more about this work. So here's an outline of what I'll cover this morning. I'm going to explore with you what an EcoCity is. I'll orient us around the One Planet Living imperative and talk about the use of frameworks and metrics to help navigate us on this journey. I'll also introduce some seeds of sustainability that are already in action around the world, including here in this corridor. Then I'll conclude with some thoughts on how we can all accelerate action. Right after my presentation, I'll be joined by 3 city leaders who are going to share examples of their progressive work advancing sustainability in their communities. So let's start with exploring what an EcoCity is within the context of our One Planet Living imperative. An EcoCity ensures its inhabitants are living within the key life support systems of the planet. This diagram here is known as the Planetary Boundaries Framework. It shows that we're bumping up against key limits of our planet. Climate change is just one of the impacts of our unsustainable patterns of consumption. We're also bumping up against biodiversity loss and chemical loading in the environment, amongst other challenges as well. We've known for some time about the limits to growth and that we're set to bump up against some important planetary boundaries because of the Earth's finite resources and our ever-growing population. We have limited biocapacity on our planet. Only about a quarter of our planet's surface is currently ecologically productive, and scientists estimate that our fair Earth share is about 1.5 global hectares per capita. But right now we're in overshoot. Globally, humanity is using about 2.5 global hectares per person. So this is the global average. The rate's much higher in our North American communities. We humans are contributing to ever-increasing demand due to our steady population growth and the fact that most of us have unsustainable consumption habits. The tool we use to understand ecological limits is the ecological footprint. It's a measurement tool we can use to figure out how close or how far we are from One Planet Living. The footprint was developed here in BC by William Rees and Matisse Falkernagel and formed the basis of the tool that Dr. Jenny Moore, the EcoCity Center founder, used to create her EcoCity footprint tool that we use with our municipalities that we work with. So the footprint is an estimate of how much land and water area an individual or population needs to produce all the resources it consumes and to absorb the waste we generate. We can use this to figure out our fair share of the planet's resources. Urban areas are now home to more than half of the global population, but these areas only cover 3% of the Earth's land surface. So this is a disproportionate impact. Many of our cities have footprints that are hundreds times larger than their physical area. Meanwhile, cities represent 2/3 of the world's energy consumption and 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Even though cities only cover 3% of the Earth's surface, we humans have appropriated more than half of the Earth's biological production from plants and animals to serve our needs, and we've impacted the majority of the Earth's land and ocean. The concentration of people in cities provides huge opportunities, though, so this is hopefully the end of the doom and gloom here. There are lots of opportunities. Cities provide efficiencies of scale, like making transit more cost-effective and enabling greater opportunities in the sharing economy, like car and bicycle sharing, and circular economy opportunities for businesses, where one business's waste becomes another's resource. But we're not yet fully exploiting these efficiencies, and our cities are draining the resource base of our planet. We need to transform the city-nature relationship from a take-make-waste system to a circular regenerative system, thought of in biology terms as shifting from a parasitic relationship to a symbiotic partnership, where we're net contributors to ecosystem function. So this will require a reimagining of our cities from being resource depleting throughput systems to self-sustaining circular flow systems. But of course, we also need to consider the social dimensions of sustainability. We have the ecological ceiling or planetary boundaries, but we also have the social foundation. Together, these comprise the donut. This is the system shown here on the slide. This was conceived by Kate Rayworth. The donut is the green ring on this diagram, recognizing that the Earth has its limits it can provide, but there's also those minimum thresholds that we need to support humanity with. Our key challenge is working towards meeting the needs of all within the means of our planet. This means making sure that no one falls short on life's essential services like food, housing, healthcare, while ensuring we collectively do not overshoot the regenerative capacity of the Earth. We need to ensure everyone takes no more than their fair share, which we can figure out using the ecological footprint. But it's also interesting to look at this in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and what our fair share is with respect to climate targets. So global studies by Oxfam and Stockholm Environment Institute are showing the dramatic correlation between income and emissions. This chart compares total global consumption-based emissions for each of the income groups. So the emissions contributions are on the inner ring and the population contributions are on the outer ring. The key takeaway here is that 50% of the world's population, that 50% of the world's consumption-related emissions can be attributed to the world's top 10% of income earners. And my slide is not transitioning, there we go. So there again, that's the 50% of the world's consumption-related emissions are attributed to the world's top 10% of income earners. Collectively, we're drawing down the Earth's resources faster than the Earth can replenish, but at the same time, many people around the world are not meeting their basic needs. To achieve one planet living, we need to follow this shrink and share model, in which we reduce the impacts of high consumers in our societies and increase access to those that aren't meeting their basic needs. Simultaneously, we need to work at regenerating nature's depleted stores, which we've been significantly drawing down since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So we can achieve this new ecological balance by reducing consumption of overconsumers, redistributing resources to those that aren't meeting their basic needs, and regenerating nature. Through the shrink, share, and regenerate approach, we can build a new balance and achieve one planet living. In working towards our sustainability objectives, the sustainability framework is essential to help us create a shared vision of where we need to get to create an action plan for getting there, and a monitoring system to ensure we're on the right path. I'm showing here a few sustainability frameworks out there that are in use right now, but today I'm going to focus in on the Ecocities standards, which is the framework we use at the Center for Ecocities. This is shown at the top right of this slide. Just one second. The Ecocities standards define. Sorry?
We're not seeing.
You're not seeing my slides. For how long?
A minute.
A minute. Interesting. I didn't change anything.
How about others?
Yeah, I just had someone else say the same thing. That's strange. Okay, let me reshare. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, now can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what happened there. So, okay, we'll catch you back up. So the Ecocities standards define an ecocity as a socially just city that is in balance with nature. The standards consist of 4 key pillars shown on the left of this slide here. So this is about ensuring healthy and sustainable built environment, ecosystems, natural environment, and society. The 4 pillars include urban design, which include providing safe, affordable, and green housing and transportation options, responsible use and stewardship of resources such as water and food, supporting healthy communities and ensuring well-being for all, and protecting and regenerating our natural systems so we are living within the ecological limits of our planet. There is no ecocity yet, but there are many seeds of sustainability. So I'm going to share some examples with you now, organized around the 4 pillars from the Ecocity standards. So there's now thousands of LEED certified buildings in many of the communities in our neighborhoods here, and hundreds also of LEED living building certified buildings. across North America, in fact. There's also the 2030 District Initiative, which I know is active in Seattle and Portland, and now in Greater Victoria as well. So this is a collaboration network based on public-private partnerships aimed at achieving a 50% reduction of energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and water use by 2030. So there are now 23 districts like these across North America. We also have new ways of constructing and even deconstructing buildings so that we can become net contributors to energy supply systems and create closed-loop material systems. Cities play an important role in protecting the health of local and global ecosystems. Many of the world's cities are located in biodiverse areas, often located along shorelines, close to river estuaries, and other ecosystem services. Cities therefore have a massive impact on our ecosystems, both directly in the physical area we occupy, but also indirectly in the impact we have on those areas that supplies our resources. It'll be important for us to continue to bring nature back into our urban environments, which can also dramatically improve our quality of life and health outcomes, but it is also critically important to understand the impact that our high consumption lifestyles are having on locations beyond our borders. There are some great examples of bringing nature back into our cities, daylighting streams, creating habitat for birds and bees, measuring and acting on our ecological footprint to reduce our impact elsewhere. Shown here on the top right is Cedar Springs Wetland in Portland. This naturalized public park is now a working wetland, attracting birds and handling urban runoff. In Vitoria-Gasteiz, Spain, not shown on the slides here, but this is a community that's created a green belt around its compact urban area by restoring abandoned gravel pits, garbage dumps, and restoring a river and wetlands. The region managed to contain 97% of its population growth within its existing urban areas, and now over half of the transportation occur on foot in the community. And also in Portugal, there's been a pilot project undertaken which would see a city's funding from the national government based on its ecological footprint and available resources. We're seeing transformations in many communities around the world with respect to sustainable materials use. These cities and regions are testing circular models, for example. Lahti, Finland is a terrific example. In 1975, Lahti was of heavy industry. Its lake was one of the most polluted lakes in Finland, and it experienced heavy unemployment during the recession because it was so industrially based. It has since transformed itself to become the European Green Capital in 2021. And as of 2018, 97% of municipal waste is utilized. This is even more impressive when you consider that they were only diverting 25% of waste in 1998. So some of their successes have been due to the initiatives like the Grain Cluster, which is a circular model, works as a cooperation network between farmers, industrial companies, and other businesses to develop circular initiatives. So examples are waste streams from microbreweries are used as ingredients by bakeries, and biofuels are generated from remaining food waste. And there's also combined heat and power generation. So their goals are even higher. Lahti aims to be a fully waste-free city with a fully circular economy by 2050, and they also aim to be carbon neutral by 2025. Rotterdam's port's another leading the way on circular business practices. An alliance was formed to act as a cluster for renewable bio-based production, including vegetable oil refineries, biofuel plants, and 2 biochemical plants. So their waste-to-chemical plant uses non-recyclable waste to produce valuable chemicals and biofuels, and their heat alliance captures heat from industry to supply the port power. It also supplies power to greenhouses and 500,000 homes. Le Deux-Rives in Paris is aiming to be the world's greenest business district. It includes 700 companies and employs 100,000 people. The district coordinates circular procurement policies such as combined waste and recycling management. So these are some really great examples from around the world, and there's many more I could share too. So onto healthy society. At the heart of an ecologically healthy society are the citizens who participate in a healthy culture and have equitable access to the means to support their well-being. Citizens should also understand and support the connections between the community in which they live and the global ecological commons upon which we depend. Copenhagen, Denmark is a great example of achieving health and community cohesion outcomes through creating compact urban form by concentrating growth around major public transportation routes. Its strategy left green space, known as green wedges, between radial transit corridors. They realized that some of these green wedges were subject to or vulnerable to suburban sprawl. So they protected them by putting in neighborhood parks, athletic fields, forests, and community gardens and landscape protection areas. So a combination of those and generating public support for maintaining these green spaces. Copenhagen now has become a world leader in eco-mobility and climate action. 62% of Copenhagen work travels occurs on bike, and 1/3 of suburban rail passengers use bicycles to solve the first mile, last mile problem of their commute. So by 2025, Copenhagen wants to have eco-mobility account for 75% of all trips, and they're well on their way there to make that target. Another example comes from the city of Brussels, which identified that a transformation to more sustainable business practices had the greatest potential to address its need for economic revitalization and job creation. Brussels is a strong example of a city providing broad support to sustainability initiatives and achieving a rapid scale up. One specific example from Brussels is their comprehensive good food strategy, which is aimed at creating a sustainable food system for the region. So it includes increasing local production of healthy food, creating sustainable jobs, new business models, innovative solutions to food chain challenges. The city is allocating space to food production, increasing awareness about the need for healthy and sustainable food amongst the population, and providing training on food production techniques. They're also increasing purchasing of local produce by securing partnerships to guarantee premium promotional space within retailers. An overarching theme I wanted to highlight is the new and thriving space of innovation. And maybe this word is overused, but it really does apply in some of these great initiatives that are going on around the world in terms of innovation labs, incubator hubs, and innovation. They're happening all over Europe, North America, and beyond. So these are often partnerships between businesses, local governments, and universities. They test new practices, models, and manufacturing techniques, and even create innovation districts where cities test out new bylaw approaches to facilitate adoption of new practices before scaling them out to the broader community. And we had an example here in Vancouver, Textiles Leverage Lab, which tackled the problem with textiles waste, looking at mapping the material flows and figuring out what businesses needed to start up to handle local textile challenges. So those are just a few seeds of sustainability. There's many, many more, and our city panelists are about to share some more with you as well. So our aim should be to expand and scale these best practices and identify new innovations. We do have a long way to go, but there's some really great seeds out there already. I wanted to share that recent research by the UN International Resources Panel found that we can decrease our resource use of cities by 80 to 90% when compared to current business as usual practices by relying on the key levers, which I've been talking about already. So the research modeled that by increasing the productivity, so this is stating this slightly differently, they modeled that by increasing productivity of the urban system by as much as a factor of 10, it's possible to urbanize in a way that creates wealth and eliminates poverty while reducing pressures we're placing on the planet. And some of the leading examples I've shared with you are showing you some of the elements of that path. To conclude, I'd like to articulate that what I think are the key ways to accelerate action. And this will lead into our questions for our city panelists, which I'm about to introduce you to. To accelerate action, first we need to empower innovation. As I shared, there's already an abundance of activity occurring right now, but we need to unlock new ways to overcome inertia and reluctance to change, which is where the following imperatives come in. We need to break down silos so that we can foster effective collaboration. And by this, I mean breaking down silos that occur internally within our organizations and also externally across organizations. We need also to integrate sustainability imperatives across our organizations everywhere. This includes meaningfully addressing both equity and environmental sustainability and aligning on a vision and a framework. This is imperative for all organizations. To enable the transformation of government and business practices and individual lifestyles, we need to generate broad-based support. We need to shift beliefs and mindsets. This is really important to empower us all to move forward. A key component of this is building eco-literacy across our society. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'll look forward to now introducing you to our city panelists. And it's good I'm stopping talking because I'm losing my voice here. So now to introduce our speakers, we have joining us Donnie Oliveira, Deputy Director of City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, Michelle Caulfield, who is the Interim Director of City of Seattle Office of Sustainability and Environment, and Brad Bedelt, Assistant Director of the City of Vancouver's Sustainability Group. So thank you and welcome to our panelists. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can do that and let them share their videos. And I will pull up my questions. So my first question is for all three panelists. And we'll start with, let's start with Michelle from Seattle. So my question is, can you each provide an example of how you have broken down silos to advance broad-based progressive sustainability action and climate action in your organizations or within, so breaking down those silos internally and with other organizations. So we'll start with Michelle from Seattle. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks so much. And thank you for such an inspiring presentation. I'm so much more motivated about my work now. It's such a nice reminder. Thanks for that question. I wanted to talk about work that we're doing in Seattle around transportation electrification. It's our most kind of recent effort to really cut across different departments and across different sectors to deliver on our climate action. Seattle's transportation emissions accounts for 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and we're really fortunate to have a municipal-owned electric utility that's carbon neutral. So the vehicles powered by electricity, of course, have zero emissions. And we know that the climate science is telling us that we need to dramatically shift away from fossil fuels in the next decade. So really looking at electrifying everything that moves people, that moves goods, that moves services is really essential to meeting our climate goals quickly. That said, Seattle, the city, doesn't have one department leading electrification. We've got an electric utility that's focused on efficiency of its customers, who are primarily building customers. We have a transportation department who's doing amazing work to get people out of cars into walking, biking, transit, and some of those alternative healthy modes Cora discussed. But vehicle electrification hasn't been part of any established goals or metrics in the city and often falls outside of the traditional purview of a local government. So our office, the Office of Sustainability and Environment, worked to really build a compelling case for action across some of these partners. And we really focused on the opportunity for the utility to generate additional revenue through bringing on more customers, through increasing, selling more electricity. And then the opportunity for our transportation department to respond to the growing attention on our transportation pollution. And so part of that work involves creating an interdepartmental team, and we facilitated some early actions through initial grants, through some recognition, and through some peer exchanges with some of the cities I'm on the panel with today here, with the Pacific Coast Collaborative, with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, connecting peers to each other to really inspire and motivate. It's been really successful. We also just released a citywide transportation electrification strategy that really focuses on 4 intersectional areas of action: infrastructure, innovative policy, equitable mobility. So we're not just talking about electric vehicles, but affordable ways for people to get around the city. And then workforce development as we're transitioning to this new industry. Some of the things that Amy Morrison talked about earlier in the work we're doing to really build a clean economy workforce. The last thing I wanted to highlight is that we've done this internal work and now we're looking outward towards this innovation that Cora talked about in terms of how we really harness that innovation that we're seeing in the private sector to help electrify our port operations, our regional bus transit system with electric buses, goods delivery through partnerships with UPS and others, and then shared mobility through electric rideshare and taxi.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. So over to Brad now from Vancouver, same question, examples of how you've broken down silos to advance sustainability initiatives in Vancouver.
Great, thanks, Cora, and thank you so much for having me today to be part of this discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work on new buildings here in Vancouver and how we've worked with the building industry, so with designers and architects and builders and contractors. And maybe I'll kind of set that up by talking about how we used to work with the building industry. So Vancouver has its own building bylaw or building code. And historically, we worked code change by code change every 2 years. I would say it was quite incremental. It was quite traditional. We would bring forward proposed changes to the code. We would go through a traditional stakeholder engagement, public open house type process and bring those to council kind of step by step. The outcomes were never great. Each one I would describe as a bit of a battle. The changes were incremental and compliance tended to be low, certainly after we brought forward the code change. In about 2015, we could see that that was not going to get us to where we needed to go. Council had given us clear direction and staff knew that we needed to get to near zero buildings by 2025 or sooner to meet our climate targets and to reduce the need for retrofits in the future. So we met with our stakeholders in the building industry at that point and laid out what we called our zero emissions building plan with them. And where we started from was general agreement on where we wanted to get to in 2025. And then we worked with them on how to get there. And a few pieces that came out that I think are really applicable to other kind of partnerships with private sectors is one, the industry wanted a roadmap. So they wanted to know where we were going with code changes over time, over 10 years versus kind of step by step. They wanted simplicity. So where we were bringing in new requirements, they wanted to ensure that the requirements were clean and simple. And where possible, we were pulling back on kind of lower priority or what I would call clutter in our regulations. So simplicity was really important for them. The third piece is that they wanted to be part of the process for creating the regulations, which may sound a bit odd, but they had some really valuable insights in terms of supply chain and what could be built economically and what could not be built economically, and kind of the sweet spot of pushing the regulation along. And that was really helpful for us to bring forward what I would call more informed or smarter regulations over time. And the third piece is that they wanted help for their members, their constituents to learn and to come along with these regulatory changes. They wanted the city to support that capacity building. So with that in mind, we brought forward a new organization called the Zero Emissions Building Exchange in 2018 that is meant to support kind of peer-to-peer learning, that's meant to identify barriers both at the city as well as in the industry. We've also relied heavily on organizations like BCIT's High Performance Buildings Lab, as well as now the Ecocities centers to help us with that work. But that capacity building piece was a really important one for the industry to feel like they were being supported to meet these changes. So I'm happy to say that now in 2021, we're well on the way to achieving near zero by 2025. And in some cases, we've got regulations in place already for our single family homes that are pretty much there. So it's certainly been a much better process for us than how we used to do business. So thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Brad. So same question now for Donnie Oliveira from City of Portland about how you've broken down silos.
Thanks, Cora. Thanks, everyone, for having me today. So the City of Portland, about a decade ago, introduced, maybe not unique, but the concept of the complete neighborhood. And initially, this was a way to look at the city and address some of our displacement and challenges with keeping not just people in homes, but also our culturally centered communities together, businesses in their place. But really, it was an opportunity for us to look at how we use the urban form and long-range planning to also address consumption. So while the city continues to focus on decarbonization of our grid and our transportation fuels, we're also looking at the consumption models that Cora alluded to in her presentation from earlier. And so what the complete neighborhood really focuses on is really focusing on a human scale design of what community centers can be like for people to access services, open spaces, the goods and the safety components of everyday life. And the opportunity for the city of Portland to activate around this is not only redressing how people are showing up in the world and their livability and their safety, but also this increases efficiencies, like Cora mentioned earlier, or how they access goods, how we access services, and frankly, how we promote active mobility around our communities. The challenge, of course, is that long-range planning often gets esoteric and gets frankly wonky from time to time. So how do we ground that for community to participate and actually convey to us what their needs are as we start to plan out 20, 30, 50 years into the future, which sometimes is difficult to get your head around. So part of that is we formed an anti-displacement action plan / task force that is really centered on getting people to the table to understand foundationally what it looks like to participate in long-range planning. And a part of that, which was driven by community, was an opportunity for us to talk about the passive and frankly direct emissions associated with our urban form. So what that looks like is not just looking at our transportation models from is it active or car-based, but really like what is it people going to be using? How are they going to be going from point A to point B? Is that multiple modes? And then also how are services and goods delivered to those community centers? This has been a really interesting model because it's challenging us to think about a new paradigm for how we design our communities and at large. And I mean community, I'm talking about urban centers and neighborhood centers. But fundamentally, the big shift for us was breaking down the silos of how long-range planning works on day-to-day operations and how we build. The city of Portland is unique in that we have our long-range planning and our Office of Sustainability in one bureau, which is actually independent of our infrastructure. So oftentimes we have an ivory tower sort of paradigm. We're trying to break that down so that we can actually see implemented the ideas that we have that are generated not just by the city, but also by community. Tangibly, that looks like a couple of things. First, when we're working within community centers, we start with a baseline understanding of existing services, and the gap analysis is done not just what the city thinks the community needs, but we're actually getting that direct feedback from community leaders and partners. The other part is, and this is a challenge I think we all face when we're talking about things like climate justice or long-range planning, is the nomenclature. What are the terms that we're using as city professionals and technical experts versus what our communities experience in our day-to-day experience of life? And so we're really working on the nomenclature and really grounding ourselves in a shared vocabulary about these terms. The idea here being is that we see a real need for access to services, but frankly, the access to design and decision-making so that we have services that are available to all of our communities. Portland's going through an extreme change right now with displacement, and we're trying to stem that at the same time meet our climate goals. See that as an opportunity, not just a dilemma. And we're hoping that these new concepts around complete neighborhoods and the solutions for those are able to generate solutions for displacement and for climate justice.
Great. Thanks so much, Donnie. Really great, rich examples from all three cities. I wanted to note, please do enter any questions in the chat and we'll try and get them to them either via the chat. And I've got colleagues from the center which can also help respond to chat questions as well. Hope we'll have a bit of time for verbal questions, but if not, we'll get to them in the chat box as well. So my next question is for Michelle at Seattle. Wanting to hear from you about how you're building equity into your sustainability climate action work. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much for this important question. And I want to just note that Donnie did such a great job talking about some of this work already in Portland. So I'll be building off of what he just talked about. I wanted to start with just a little context about the city of Seattle. We've had a long-standing race and social justice initiative in our city for more than a decade, really focused on training staff to support in the work of acknowledging past harm, to name and work to undo institutionalized racism, and also to advance racial justice in partnership with those most impacted. So as Donnie talked about, getting folks impacted by injustice part of the design and solutions. We know in the US and elsewhere that centuries of racist policies have really contributed to stark racial equity gaps that we see across almost every progress measure. Cora, you highlighted some of those around wealth gaps and disparity gaps in terms of health. And in our work and environmental work, people of color are more exposed to air and toxic pollutants. They're harder hit by the impacts of climate change, further undermining health and other disparities. 5 years ago, our office, the Office of Sustainability and Environment, we launched an Equity and Environment Initiative to really build on the city's racial equity work and deepen our partnership with communities around environmental justice. And today, I'd say our strategies are focused on reducing climate pollution, but also providing employment opportunities, investing in communities, and addressing racial equity through those investments, trying to right some of the wrongs of the past. And this is really a stark difference from, several years ago when our climate work was very technical. It was very focused on targeting GHG emissions by sector, on reducing those emissions as quick as possible, as efficiently as possible. And that's super important work, but we're really looking now at how to deliver on co-benefits as part of a racial climate justice movement. In 2019, just before the pandemic hit, our city council passed Green New Deal legislation to help transition our city away from fossil fuels and towards a clean economy, investing in communities most harmed by climate change and really focusing on the job opportunities and impacted workers as part of this really economic transition that we all need to see. And this means, enhancing resilience in our communities through apprenticeships and workforce training, as well as accessing new jobs in this clean energy economy. So I would say today, our climate strategy is looking much more like a job strategy and a people strategy. And that's just really important as we look at moving from being more efficient in what we're doing to actually transitioning the underlying energy systems, and that actually tackles sort of entrenched interests in the fossil fuel industry. And so we need labor. We need labor to be a partner in that transition. In almost closing, just to let you know kind of where we are in this work, the pandemic hit as we're moving out of response into recovery in our city. We're just kicking off this work now, and we're creating a Green New Deal interdepartmental team across our city, much like I talked about with electrification, that involves a number of different departments, including our Office of Economic Development. And we're establishing a community board of leaders to bring together those most impacted by environmental injustice, along with labor stakeholders, tribal members, youth, workforce development leaders, and climate expertise. And collectively, we are looking forward to exploring coordinated strategies and investments to get us off fossil fuels and really capitalize on what we think and hope are some new funding opportunities coming from our federal government through climate and clean energy investments. We've got some new state climate regulations that might provide some resources, and a local payroll tax that we passed and is in legal review in the process right now. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. Really highlighting that climate change does present a huge opportunity for us to transition to a better future, bouncing forward better into a new alternative future. So thank you for that. My last question is for Brad and Donnie. Wanting to hear from you both how you're generating broad-based support amongst community for your sustainability work. So we'll start with Brad at Vancouver.
Great, thanks, Cora. It's a really good question. So much of last year, we spent developing our climate emergency action plan for Vancouver. And as part of that work, we did some surveying and polling of residents. And what we found is there was a really high level of support in Vancouver, which was great. We had, I think, over 80% of Vancouver residents were either somewhat or very concerned about climate change. That polls higher than national polling, so that was really encouraging for us. But we also found that when we asked residents what they thought were the most important climate actions, the responses were not in line with what I would say the answers are. So I'll give an example. In Vancouver, over half of our emissions, about 55%, come from burning of natural gas to heat our buildings and for hot water. It's our single biggest source of emissions by far. But when we asked residents what they thought were the most important actions, waste reduction tended to score highest, which waste reduction has a number of important drivers and benefits behind it. But in terms of tying it to climate action, there was a real disconnect in terms of what we need to focus on and what residents thought were the top priorities. And how this is a big challenge for us is we could see that if we didn't start to address that when we bring forward measures to, say, reduce fossil fuel usage in our buildings, those 80% of people who want climate action won't connect that to a climate action and won't necessarily voice support for it. So recognizing that gap and that kind of energy literacy gap that we were facing, we've done a couple of things now to mobilize our community here in Vancouver. One was we created what we're calling an amplifiers network. The Amplifiers Network is just over 100 individuals, businesses, organizations that are really keen to support climate action and want to know how. And so we keep them closely informed in terms of the work we're doing, measures that are coming forward or policies that are coming forward so that they can do their part in terms of informing others in their community and getting the word out and hopefully building support. The second piece that we've been working on, and I would say it's still a work in progress, is trying to tackle that broader energy literacy gap. We've been doing a number of different things through social media, through ads on buses and bus stops and whatnot, to raise awareness about what climate action looks like in Vancouver and what residents can do to play their part. But it's really becoming clear that we have some difficult actions to bring forward in the coming years, and if we don't have kind of broad public support for those, we're going to struggle to bring them forward. So we're really working to help inform and mobilize our community on that. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Brad. And being in the area, I know this has been exceptional work that the City of Vancouver has done in this space. So congratulations on that great work. So same question now to Donnie, Portland, about how you've been generating broad-based support amongst the community for this work.
So this is really interesting, and it's really tapping into some of the work that we've been on, the journey we've been on the last year. In June, like many communities around the globe, the City of Portland declared a climate emergency. And this is the first, bite of the apple that the City of Portland's taken on climate action. We go back about 30 years of rich history in climate action planning and successfully implementing many of those targets and objectives. But over the last decade or so, we've seen a waning of support and trust from our communities at large around what the intent behind the City of Portland's climate action, what we were solving for, who was benefiting from those actions, and frankly, who was still carrying a disproportionate level of harm and burden. And so as a part of the Climate Emergency Declaration, the City of Portland initiated what we're now calling the Climate Justice by Design model, which going forward with our policy development will center frontline voices and community leaders on all phases of policy design and programmatic design. And what that looks like is a lot more investment in time. You may have heard the term moving at the speed of trust, but it's really designed to reset the table, who's at the table, and deciding what sorts of actions and investment the city will be making to meet our climate goals. We have aggressive goals like many of the cities at the table today to be carbon neutral by 2050. And how we get there is still the question. So we know we're decarbonizing, we know we're accelerating electrification in our transportation fleets, but who benefits and how are those decisions, investments made? And so the Climate Justice by Design initiative is currently co-led by community leaders and advocates and traditional environmental stakeholders. City and county and local leaders are at the table. The big pieces that are traditional utility partners who would normally be there for energy conversations are not at the table yet. This design is very unique, that we're still building it as we go, building it back as we write it. The opportunity here, though, is we are trying to show a level of humility that we have ideas as a city, we don't have all the answers, but we're also trying to build up a broader base, because these community leaders are also our most important messengers for telling the story as we go on and as we get into those tougher conversations about the policies and initiatives we need, not just in Portland, but across the globe, frankly, to actualize and really meet those really aggressive global targets we have. We're going to need some tough policy implementations, and we're going to need the messengers and leaders of our communities to be there at the forefront to describe why we're doing it, what the value proposition is, and also to ensure these are community-led initiatives. It's difficult to have a conversation about consumption when people are having a difficult time just putting food on the table for their families. So what does that look like? And we're talking about transportation as we're displacing people outside of the urban center. Now they're having to drive. We're saying it's bad to be in a combustible engine vehicle. What is that conversation like? How do we initiate those policies to ensure that that's not happening? The climate justice by design is considered third space. So it's not housed in government. It's not necessarily just community telling government what to do. It really is supposed to be a new enriched co-creation space. That may sound a little bit foo-foo-y in some ways about like what does that actually mean? But the truth is that we are trying to get to a place where we have more stakeholders, the unusual suspects, participating in these really critical steps for our communities. I do have a lot of faith because of the participants already, their commitment that this is developing something that's rich. Our first target actually is going to be efficiency in building sector. So they're very pragmatic about what we're talking about. You know, Brad just alluded to community thinking that, you know, the waste, we have that same initial piece of what do you want to focus on? Waste. Once we showed data and started to produce like some results about like what that might look like, if we did that versus tackling something a little bit more broad like buildings or transportation, our community partners really got it. They understood, okay, let's shift our energy from waste to buildings as an example. And so I think there's an opportunity here for us to learn about what a new process might look like as we go about still, you know, not changing our targets and our objectives of emissions reductions. And the other piece about this, and I'll flag this because it's come up a couple of times and I just want to be cautious about it too, is yes, we're focused on climate emission reductions. It's absolutely the core to our sustainability work, but we are also very sensitive about the health of our communities, including access to open space, active transportation, and spaces of safety. And those tenets are equally as important to our community and to government. The nexus there is ensuring that people aren't myopic on one or the other, that we're building like a more integrated approach. And that's where that whole complete neighborhoods concept comes into play. When it comes to climate justice by design, we're also doing that same thing. We're not just chasing emissions. We're also ensuring that these are have co-benefits built into all the different policies, including wealth generation for our frontline and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, which is a key indicator for our initiative. So I'm going to pause there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Donnie. So we have just 2 minutes or so for audience questions, and there's a few great ones in the chat right now. So there's a question around food policies, how food policies around promoting urban farming have been developed by any of the municipalities. Also about how to address affordable housing within the sustainability efforts, and also about how to utilize underutilized road space as well. So I don't know if you've read these questions in the chat, but if you could answer, well, you've got about 30 seconds each to answer any of those questions. So let's start with Michelle. We haven't heard from you for the longest. So Michelle, if you want to start on that, either any of those questions. Oh, and you're muted.
Okay,
Michelle.
great. Yep, I got it. I found the mute button. I put a few things in the chat. I was sort of responding while I was seeing some things, but I guess I could tackle the food one. Our office is very engaged in kind of food policy citywide, as well as partnerships with farmers and our county, kind of local sustainable ag. So we have a food action plan that's been in place, an interdepartmental team, as I've talked about before, but we've been really connecting our equity work to our food work as well, and have a really leading food justice strategy that's focused on providing incentives and essentially benefits to folks to purchase healthy local food from local farms at farmers markets, and now with local grocers who are stocking fresh and healthy foods. And so we have a sweetened beverage tax that we passed that provides some revenue that we can invest in these programs and bring on small ethnic grocers, connect local communities to food in those grocery stores, and really spur economic development, health in terms of connecting fresh fruits and vegetables and seasonal fruits and vegetables, as well as prioritizing purchasing, being that demand for our local regional farms. And we do that in partnership with our county as well.
Great, thank you. So Brad, 30 seconds for you on the spot here, and we can do more in the responses in the chat as well.
It's a tall order, and I'm going to dangerously tackle the affordability question, which is a huge question, but I'll just say that we've tried to focus on cost of living. We have done some modeling with our climate plan, and being able to live within a walk, roll, or cycle of all of your daily needs within a rapid transit station can be a huge benefit in terms of reducing the cost of living. We've also seen a lot of opportunities to partner with our affordable housing group to deliver healthy, affordable housing that reduces emissions dramatically as well. So I do think there's opportunities for those two pieces to go hand in hand, but we're still kind of early days for that, I would say. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Brad. Any final words, Donnie?
Yeah, just echo Brad's thing. There's a credible opportunity in the affordable housing market to both just build well, non-toxic buildings for our communities to reduce their health impacts, but also where we build those affordable housing units is also critical, making sure they're near core services and city centers, open spaces. Again, all at the inherent cost and burden that cities and communities experience when our low income and underserved residents aren't taken care of. So real opportunity about not just how we build those buildings, but where we place them.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Really inspiring to work with you. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you to advance sustainability in the corridor. So thanks so much for joining us today. And over to you, Tom.
Well, thank you very much, Cora. Appreciate that. Appreciate your presentation. Great and fantastic panel. Thanks to all three participants from the municipalities. It was really super to hear how much is going on. I would argue that any sustainability strategy lives and dies by participation, right? If you don't have the populace be part of it, it's difficult to push it through. And of course, participation depends on, firstly, on the awareness of the problem, and then secondly, on the awareness of the palette of solutions. And you used a term, Cora, called eco-literacy, and that's something that has been, especially for the educators, on their mind. The question, how can we make people more eco-literate? And so what we invited today is a panel of people who are trying to do exactly that, to get the knowledge into the general populace. And who we invited, it's a cross section. So we have Steve Eccles, who is the regional CEO and Dean of Northeastern University in Vancouver. We have Dwayne Elverum, who is the executive director and co-founder of City Studio in Vancouver, and Dr. Andrea Frisk, who is the senior associate and building performance engineer at Stantec. And what links all three of them, is, other than their commitment to sustainability and to quality, is that they represent endeavors that operate on both sides of the border. So they all have a foot in Canada and a foot in the US, and that of course bodes well for the Cascadia theme. So I'm thinking, Dwayne, maybe I start with you because you work directly with the city, so it's easy to create the bridge in there. What exactly is it that City Studio does?
Thanks, Tom. Really interesting panels and conversation so far. So I'm the ED of City Studio, and I'm joined with Miriam Escatine in the crowd somewhere. She's the director of the Vancouver program. And I'm just going to say a few words about our work on the lands of the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh and the Musqueam peoples, where we're working with permission but not yet patience. And it's a really interesting dynamic and challenge, that context we're working within. You'll learn a bit more about it as I say a few words here. So City Studio is an adaptable partnership framework that enables ongoing strategic collaboration between municipal governments and their academic institutions. Think of it as a switchboard and a project coordination team standing by for calls from the city and calls from all of the academic institutions. And it's basically a matchmaking process. Our research and work over the past 10 years has really aimed to close this common and persistent gap in cities between the municipalities and their academic institutions across Canada, but around the world. I've probably spoken with 150 mayors over the past few years, and everyone says the same thing. Academics, institutions, and cities generally don't talk to each other. And there's a lot of history around that in a lot of the political context, but it's an important context that we're trying to work into. And it's really weird that two of our largest public good institutions don't work together commonly, normally, easily. So we saw this as a kind of an enormous untapped potential. Now, there's been a notable movement in this gap, a lot of community service work, a lot of community engagement, a lot of service learning, but there is no systematic, high-level, strategic partnership that allows cities and academic institutions to work together in an ongoing strategic way in the everyday business of city building. And that's what we're aiming to do. So we close this gap by creating local partnerships. We train local City Studio programs and the coordinators, and it becomes a one-stop shop in a way. It's basically a subscription model. We're a charity in Canada, and we provide this subscription model across Canada in different places in the world. Members who join, they join a community of practice. There's peer-to-peer learning for best practices, knowledge exchange, residencies for faculty and city staff and researchers and students. And in addition to the local impact of each partnership in the 15 locations, there's also the capacity for the network to work together for collective impact. And I see this as the major opportunity in the Cascadia Corridor, and it's kind of a regional template. And I'm really proud of the team, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done. It's a significant movement. There are now 15 cities in our network and regional municipalities in the network. They've adopted the City Studio model, and they're working together. And our aim is to double the size of the network over the next 2 or 3 years. And these 15 cities have collectively worked with 17,000 students who have contributed over 400,000 hours of class time. This is credit time to the cities that they're living in, working on real problems. And the network is really normalizing everyday collaboration of our institutions and everyday city building. And in the 10 years that we've been doing this work, this is strategic collaboration, it's experimentation, and it's inclusivity, engagement. We've seen that this model has really meaningful mutual benefit. The cities and the network now have a permanent connection between their academic institutions and all city staff. This is a permanent pipeline. These channels are used by city staff to connect with any discipline in any post-secondary. So any department in the city can connect with any discipline, and it's our job to make that connection and help coordinate projects and coordinate relationships. Faculty and researchers gain access to the inner workings of the city for their research and their classwork and their assignment generation. And then the students, importantly, which is where I've started my career as an architecture professor, the students gain work-integrated learning and career skills within their credit classes. And of course, the citizens and neighborhoods are provided the opportunity to engage directly. And they really contribute local knowledge. So it's kind of this, in the words of a past city manager in Vancouver, it's like the triple word score of institutional collaboration. So Tom, I'll pause there. There's lots of projects on the website you can check out, but I'll pause there and just leave it at that for the moment.
Great, thanks, Dwayne. And we, of course, at BCIT, we've worked with City Studio for many years, and we can definitely attest to its efficacy. And it's certainly a very unique approach, but definitely one that's sorely needed. Now, speaking of unique approach, I want to kind of switch over to Steve Eccles. Northeastern is also a bit of a unique player, if you want, of course, in the university realm. They started out in Boston, but from what I understand, Steve, you now have campuses all across North America and even in the UK. And so you certainly qualify for a Cascadia seal of approval, being on both sides of the border. But what is it that makes Northeastern, and how do you, let's just say, how do you support the concept of sustainability, for example, therein?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's great to be on the panel. It was actually 2 years ago that Greg Davignon welcomed our president to an event here in Vancouver, and it's wonderful to be part of this fantastic community. So we're here to support community and directly to generate talent. And that sounds so obvious, but we're bringing innovative programs like Align into the community. Align is a computer science master's which draws from a far more diverse pool. So, for example, 54% of current Align students are women. Why is that important? Because when you have a more diversified cohort, they go out and make a more diversified and creative impact in the world. And those Align students are present in our Seattle campus and our Vancouver campus. That means that we're connecting our communities cross-border to solve problems, work on industry projects, and impact broader impact in our communities, including sustainability. So we're already sharing talented professors as well as students. I have to say that my colleague in Seattle had to drop from the call 5 minutes ago. He just told me, I want to connect with you because our College of Science, Environmental Science and Policy program wants to create a semester in Cascadia opportunity. I guess I couldn't give a better example of that, of the power to connect cross-border to make an impact. And then what are we doing on sustainability? Well, obviously our footprint is global. The Vancouver campus is part of a sustainability initiative where we pay attention to our built infrastructure. We're supported by Northeastern's Office of Sustainability, and our president just signed Second Nature's Climate Action Pursuit Towards Justice and Resilience, and that is copied into a climate justice action plan. It really is at the core of what we do in the global network. We're expected to obviously support it. And more critically, we're here to support the community here in critical outcomes, including sustainability, and not just filling a talent gap.
Great, thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. And yeah, hey, good luck with that Cascadia Opportunities initiative. That would be great to put something, to throw something across the border, so to speak. The interesting thing is, of course, when we at our institutions, when we graduate our people, but this is always a number, but where the real impact then happens is when they join the workforce. And so they have to end up with the practical implementers. They have to come out of academia and then join usually industry. And one of our core partners out there is Stantec, which is a worldwide engineering company. And it's one of these multidisciplinary engineering firms that operates in the US and Canada and a whole bunch of other countries. So, which leads me over to Andrea. Andrea, what is it that you do at Stantec, and how do you make use of our graduates?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Tom. Stantec's global reach and local community presence at the same time require an interesting mix of local experience with global expertise and innovation. So in other words, you need to be well connected to your local construction community, design community, but you also need to understand the wider global framework that you're acting within. And with sustainability, of course, that's become increasingly important because what's doable needs to be implemented everywhere. And that's the global reach, but we need to bring it into our diverse local communities, which to me, that's where the challenge is. So as an example, my building performance engineering team has specialized in providing advanced computational design and simulations for buildings of all types and in many different locations. And we're using and developing new digital tools for design and for data analysis. So using that global expertise, we were able to complete a few first of its kind buildings in Canada. For example, the first Passive House certified education building in North America, I should say university education building, the Wood Innovation Research Lab at UNBC, and also the first zero carbon design certified building, Evolve 1 in Waterloo, Ontario, which is a building that's intending collaboration with the local university there as well. Yeah, and as innovation requires new expertise and skills, new graduates play a really big role in that. We bring in people from all sorts of universities and institutes and backgrounds, and they bring in new expertise into the design process and the well-established design processes. And so, of course, that they are very well educated is important, and that their education is practical and can be used right away. But it also means that it's getting more and more important for people to be able to update their expertise and their skills as they move through their profession. So maybe after 5 years, after 10 years, that they have access to that new expertise in a different way than just through osmosis in the workplace.
That's an interesting point, Andrea. There is sort of a bit of a new arrival, if you want, on the stage of academic credentials, and it's in Canada. It's usually referred to as a micro-credential. And the idea behind the micro-credential was that it would give people the opportunity to take one particular competency, and you were just mentioning they need to stay ahead and they need to stay abreast with the state of the art, and they need to upgrade their skills. And these micro-credentials were sort of aimed at giving people the flexibility to learn one competency at a time, rather than having to enroll in yet another 2-year program, which most people cannot afford, be it for availability of time or for budget or for whatever reason that might be. But this idea of a sort of a self-contained short cycle credentials that is based on a distinct competency rather than the number of hours spent in the classroom. Maybe that's a question for Steve. Do you see a role of micro-credentials play in the short and long term?
Yeah, Tom, we're definitely seeing that. And in the short term, micro-credentials are a great choice for those folks who need to build or improve an understanding in a specific competency. Where they can play a role right now is obvious in workforce economic recovery. The ability for people to quickly skill into a key area. And, we all know there's nothing like a crisis to give us the impetus to accelerate away from that crisis, but we need to educate and support our employees to get there. And micro-credentials offer that terrific concentrated short form approach that you talked about. I think you're seeing governments paying attention to them. The BC government has afforded funding. I know BCIT, for example, took advantage of that, which is great, including the BCIT digital transformation offering. So we're already seeing the impact of micro-credentials. In the long term, you're going to see many of us with current credentials starting to add to whether you've got a bachelor's or a master's. You should never stop learning in this current phase. And you can also mix and match. It can be kind of close to your discipline, or you could be a political science grad but do a sustainability micro-credential as you see opportunities open up. I think it's important to say that we're moving to a new learning phase here, a new period where education is blurring with that innovation opportunity, and they complement each other. I think you often see, well, the undergrad is dead or whatever. They're not. We actually need a hybrid set of solutions to get our learners into a new phase. I think a critical point, though, is employees in the long term, they have to support their workforce to take these. They need time and they need the resources to do it. And one way is to make sure that micro-credentials and lifelong learning is seen as part of a total compensation package. I think more employees will be looking for that, just like they look for orthodontics for the kids, right? I think it's going to be as important as that. And then another imperative, the final one, we've got to make sure that organizations are shifting culturally. Because it's not enough to ask your employees to take the innovation load and learn. I think our organizations have to learn. I'm really delighted that we're working with BCIT and a digital media company called Domain 7 to talk about a process called transformation design. That's a process that equips a company to adopt new technology, to support their employees, and to accelerate not just business success and their impact, but it accelerates their purpose, their values, and why they should matter to community. I think transformation design is a micro-credential and more for an entire business, and it complements the learning solutions for individuals.
Interesting. Thanks. Very, very interesting. What kind of occurred to me, of course, is that micro-credentials, because they're not based in that sense on an academic framework, but they're based on clearly defined competency, they're very mobile across the border. If I can do something up in here in Canada, I can do the same thing down in the States, and I don't need to articulate a lot, but I can simply apply it. So yeah, good point. You brought up an interesting point too, that micro-credentials can happen at a very high level, right? They could even be at the master's level, at the graduate level. It has nothing to do with entry level. It's simply a short cycle element. Kind of cool. Andrea, do you think that's something that a company like Stantec would use in the years to come, like a model of short cycle credentials in order to complete the skill set of individuals?
Yeah, from my perspective, I would say that it really responds to a need that I've seen increasingly. We're working on sustainability, on energy efficiency, computational design. And of course, those are all things that people are interested in, but they haven't necessarily learned that at the time when they took their degrees. And so people ask me, how can I move into this field, into this area? And that's been very challenging so far because there's really not much in terms of education that you can take once you're out of your full-time program. That's nonetheless going to a sufficiently detailed level that you can really use it. So I would also agree that it's more at a graduate level, maybe, so that those are specialized classes where you really learn it to the point that you can then go and work in a team with some mentorship and pick up projects. Maybe I should say it the other way around. No matter how much you support somebody who's never seen the foundations, it remains frustrating to everyone, and it's really sad to see for those people who are investing a lot of effort. And if they could take a targeted piece, sometimes even something like thermodynamics or so, just add a piece that they're missing, it could give them a huge boost, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, that I could definitely see that work. Of course, also micro-credentials can be done in conjunction with projects and with practical applications and people learning something in the field. Which kind of brings me a little bit back to Dwayne. From the time that we have worked with city studios, we at BCIT, we have always found, or I have always found, that our sustainability managers in the municipalities, they often have the right ideas, but then they need to sell the citizens and the taxpayers on it, and whether that works is a bit of a different question. It almost seems like if it's not popular, they get crucified for it, and if it is popular, then everybody just says, well, so what? So you can't really win. But if an initiative doesn't work out, as I said, they get raked over the coals basically for wasting taxpayers' money. Is that somewhere where City Studio can help a little bit by infusing students into the process?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the kind of magic of the model is that nothing changes. And out of fairness, university presidents have a lot on their plate, and it doesn't help that things change unexpectedly. So they know that nothing changes. There's a large mandate for innovation in cities, but mostly it's about keeping the lights on and filling potholes. And the slice of innovation is actually quite narrow, even though that's our 100% world in many ways, and everyone who's in this room probably. But the idea is that with nothing changes, that this pipeline between the cities and the academic institutions, it means that the kind of support can be brought online into an existing project and work plan very quickly, and that they can work on different timelines, and that we think of this work as it's a kind of pre-incubation project support. It's also kind of like pre-launch, in the sense that if a city staff needs research, or they need an additive piece of material, or a piece of background, or they need some work done on a site in the city, before their work becomes a program or becomes formalized or becomes a policy, that's the kind of sweet spot for City Studio. And there's often budget for this kind of work within staff. But the idea is that they can now enlist the universities that are now connected to these issues on site, and the students and the researchers and whatnot. And to kind of put an economic lens on it, you're getting a kind of consultancy, a pre-project consultancy at a living wage, essentially, in terms of the kind of subscription cost, versus what is this, anywhere between $150 and $450 an hour. You're kind of getting this kind of needed work that often doesn't get funded initially. City staff are overworked, and there's a lot on their plates. And the idea that they can get a group or a researcher to kind of work with them for a very short period of time during a kind of important piece of the project is extremely useful. And it's quite cheap. I mean, a City Studio subscription is like 30 grand, let's say, Canadian. And you amortize that over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of students in 4 universities and the city for the lifetime. It's this kind of It's kind of piece of missing cultural infrastructure that we found is really helpful for cities and academic institutions and citizens. This kind of mutual thing I talked about.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Well, thanks to our three panelists. I want to use the last couple of minutes to maybe go into some questions. I found one here, which kind of rings near and dear to my heart. Hugh posted, why are US-Canada educational institutions along the Cascadia Corridor not participating in cross-border tuition agreements, reciprocity programs, or in-state province tuition for American and Canadian students? Washington State had a reciprocity agreement with BC that ended in the 90s. Should we be considering reestablishing this? That's an excellent question. And we do have, I know a lot of our institutions have individual agreements. So even with institutions in Europe and Asia, but that's all one by one. That's not like a general standing agreement. So from my end, I think this is actually a very interesting topic, and it would definitely be worth discovering again. Steve, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable question, and it's something that we should discuss as part of our commitment to the corridor. You know, I do believe that, you know, we have to be extremely open to challenging the process of the way that we structure access to university education. That's a more broad answer to the specific question. But what I would also say is, in the meantime, we just got to keep on pushing on, because I think there's been high levels of collaboration, at least between the institutions across the corridor. That would be an exciting element to bring into the next meetings, Tom. I do want to also talk about the benefit of just making sure that in the meantime, we have collaboration between the universities around student projects. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done in the corridor, and we can unleash a lot of students together as a collective to solve those issues. So in the meantime, while we're figuring out the answer to that question, there's more work we can do.
Yeah, great answer. Yeah, no, I agree. We need, in order to push the idea forward of the corridor, we need to establish as many conduits as we can and tear down as many silos as we can. So this is a very good example for a policy that would be worthwhile exploring. Definitely looking forward to talking to some of my colleagues about this. All right, this gets us to 11:25, and before Cheryl gives me the hook and kicks me off here, and all of you with me, I would like to thank our three panelists, as well as our three panelists from the municipalities and our keynote speaker, Cora Halsworth. And with that, I hand it over to Greg Davignon to give the final remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Romer, and to all of you. I really want to thank Dr. Amy Morrison for her leadership with Tom as the co-chairs of this committee, and just the way that they're leading and bringing us together. And it's evident in the conversation today. Cora, I want to thank you for just a fantastic presentation around holistically thinking about what we're doing and how we do it with purpose. And with Brad and Michelle and Donnie for your leadership in cities and building out a more sustainable environment. And not the least of which, Dwayne and my pal Steve and Andrea for your contributions. A really thought-provoking conversation around how we actually take one of our superpowers in the Pacific Northwest, which is really talented, educated people, and make sure that they can personally and collectively leverage the opportunities we've got in front of us, both through lifelong learning, but also through the ability to deploy those talents in informative and innovative ways within companies. So we really canvassed today the intersection of sustainability and action and collaboration. I think we've heard breaking down silos with purpose and taking talent to make sure that we can leverage it to its full and highest effect, and do it in a way that's inclusive. So a couple of takeaways from me are, how do we purposely break down the barriers? How do we convene business, innovators, academia, investors, and various publics at all levels, and including governments, where in both sides of the border, at the city level, the regional district or the county level, the state or provincial level or federal level, often there's discord and or lack of continuity around policies and actions and pace. How do we bring that together? How do we build eco-literacy on the things that are material that we can work on together and incent the activities and investments and actions in ways that have material benefit and outcomes as opposed to just process. And I think within that, how do we become a more inclusive society? And we've all seen the ugly struggles that we face as a society as a result of COVID that's unmasked fissures in our communities. And one of the strengths we've got is the diverse and heterogeneous populations and talent we have, and how do we lift that up and bring people together? And I think just lastly, back around people, just some real provocations around, I think, Steve, you used the term, we're in a new era. How do we bring together really talented people through a lifelong learning approach and micro-credentialing or continually upskilling those folks as the digital transformation continues to pick up speed? And then applying that knowledge in new technologies, new construction trends, as we heard in the first panel, and really getting at the affordability and transportation things we need, like high-speed rail and other connecting modes of low and zero carbon mobility for people, goods, and trade. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. I'll remind you, if you haven't had the chance to look at it, the work that Boston Consulting Group did through the Cascadia Innovation Corridor and Governor Gregoire's leadership, the Cascadia Sustainable Growth Vision 2050. It really touches on a differentiated opportunity for us to be the North America's first sustainable mega region on so many of the themes that we talked about today that improve the quality of life, sustainability, housing affordability, reduce congestion, and reducing our emissions, despite the fact our population will grow, as will our economies. Maybe just a pitch for what we're doing here in the Business Council, and I know Chris is doing a lot of work around bringing us together around ESG. So I'd turn your attention to esginbc.ca. We just launched yesterday a 5-part series around how do we attract the $100 trillion of ESG capital and host the talent and innovation in the corridor to really drive a demonstrable impact on climate, but also sustainability. And we had a number of speakers, including Nigel Topping, the UN Climate Ambassador for COP26, and his call to action on the race to zero, including Mark Podlaski as well, the First Nations Major Projects Coalition lead, who is really leading Indigenous peoples' full participation of placement of capital to build out the infrastructure, housing, energy, and low carbon export economy that we all need. So moving on to just finishing up, Cascadia's Transformative Tech is our next and 7th session. It's about innovating across borders, and it's a virtual Cascadia event like we just experienced today. Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021, from 9 a.m. until 10:30, and the details Cheryl's put up in the chat function. It's really an opportunity to explore the strength of the corridor in many respects as a global cluster for tech talent, capital, and growing and scaling and world-leading platform companies in quantum, in blockchain, in AI, and augmented reality, and the application that we're seeing in every sector of our economy and business, including academia, around agri-food and agri-tech, resource development, life sciences, smart infrastructure, and advanced manufacturing and transportation. And just lastly, I just want to thank my, I think she described partner in crime, which I would agree, but it's partner in crime for good, Governor Chris Gregoire. She's a true national treasure and international leader and has done so much to keep Washingtonians safe and evoking her leadership to make us prosperous, enabling the collaboration that we just saw here today, not just within Washington State and across the border, but I would argue across the continent. Governor, I haven't told you this, but I'm petitioning our Lieutenant Governor to make sure you get honorary BC citizenship so we can get you up here with your daughter and son-in-law much sooner than we had hoped. So I want to thank you, Governor, for your leadership and your friendship, and for all of you for collaborating with us today with purpose to make this region a differentiated place for sustainability, inclusiveness, and smart growth in a world that desperately needs leadership that we're seeing this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.